All right. So here we are. We're going to discuss the issue in Parshat Vayetzei about Yaakov marrying two sisters. So, of course, the whole story of Parshat Vayetzei is Yaakov is running away from his brother Esav, who wants to kill him, after he succeeded in getting the blessings from Yitzchok. And he goes to Haran, and there he meets Rachel.
Powering on. Welcome to Alltech Lansing.
I think I'm going to have to mute everybody, if you don't mind. And then you can unmute yourself as you need. How do I do that? I don't remember.
Push the button that says mute all.
Mute all, got it. Okay. So Yaakov sees Rachel at the well. He agrees right then and there. He decides he wants to marry her. According to our sages, he already asks her then, gives her a sign, because she already suspects that her father will try to marry off her sister first. And let's do some reading. We'll do first the Hebrew, then the English. Vayehav Yaakov es Rachel vayomer evotcha sheva shana berachel bitcha haketana. Yaakov loved Rachel, and he said to Lavan, I will work for you for 7 years to be able to marry your younger daughter Rachel. So he specifically mentioned her name, and the younger one, he wanted to make sure there would be no misunderstanding. Vayavad Yaakov Barachel Sheva Shanim. He worked for her for 7 years. He loved her so much that the years passed very quickly. They were like a few days. Yaakov said to Lavan, give me my wife. My days are filled. I did my quota. So it's time for me to marry her. Lavan gathered all the people of the place together and he made a party. In the evening, he took Leah, his daughter, and he brought her to him, and he came upon her. It was dark, didn't recognize her. Obviously, they didn't have too much conversation, or maybe he didn't converse with Rachel too much during the 7 years that he was hanging around in the area, so he didn't recognize her voice. Not clear exactly. But whatever it was, it was only in the morning that he saw that it was Leah. And he said to Lavan, what have you done to me? I worked for you for Rachel. And why did you trick me? Lavan said, we don't do this in our area. Lavan is a big tzaddik, you see. I'm such a tzaddik. I don't want to change what is customary in our area. To give the younger daughter before the older one. Malei Shavua Zois finished this week. Even back then, they had a concept of Sheva Brachas. They didn't say the blessings like we do in the Sheva Brachas, but they had a concept of celebrating for a week after a wedding. So he didn't want to interrupt that week of celebration. So he says, complete this week of celebration. I'll give you that one too. You'll only have to work another 7 years for her. Yaakov did that. And he gave Rachel to him for a wife. So he didn't work, by the way, for the other 7 years first. He only waited a week, married her, and then he worked another 7 years after that. Lavan gave Rachel, his daughter, Bilhah, her maidservant, or his maidservant, to her for a maidservant. And of course, Bilhah and Zilpah will feature later on in the story. Yaakov ends up marrying them and so on. But in any case, he had a relationship with Rachel. He loved her more than Leah, and he worked for Lavan another 7 years. So, the commentaries have difficulty understanding Yaakov's behavior in this story. We know that the forefathers observed the Torah. Of course, the Torah was not given yet until after it was given. But yet, we have a tradition that the forefathers observed the Torah anyway. How do they know the Torah if it wasn't given yet? It seems that they knew it prophetically. And some of the sages go so far as to say they even observed the rabbinic laws. We had a verse in last week's parsha which said that Avram was Vayishmar Mishmarti Mitzvoisai Chukoisai V'Soirosoi. Avraham guarded my Mishmarti, which means my guardings, my mitzvos, my chukim, and my Torah. And Mishmarti, my guardings, is, according to the sages, according to some of the commentaries, is referring to the rabbinic fences. The rabbis sometimes erect a fence around the Torah law to protect the Torah law. So not only they observe the Torah's actual laws, but even the rabbinic laws. We have a verse in the next week's parsha which alludes to this as well. In the beginning of next week's parsha, Yaakov sends a message to Esav where he says, "Im Lavan garti, I dwelled with Lavan." And Rashi says that the word garti is the same letters as taryag, which means 613. And Yaakov was saying, I lived with Lavan, and even though he was a big gangster and a big trickster, as we're reading right now, I was not affected by that. I continued to observe the taryag mitzvahs, 613 commandments, which means that he observed all of the Torah, basically, because that's 613 commandments. Way more than just the 7 mitzvahs that all Noahides have to observe, all mankind have to observe. So this leads us to the question, the Torah forbids marrying 2 sisters. It's a verse in the Torah portion of Achrei Mos, where it says, V'isha el achoisa loi sikach. You may not take a woman in addition to her sister, litzror, to cause them to be enemies. The word tsar is like narrow or difficult. Litzror legales ala avasa b'chayeha, and to have relations with her while she is still alive. Which means that since sisters by nature love each other, and the nature of wives, 2 wives that are sharing the same husband, on the contrary, is to hate each other because they're each vying for the husband's attention. So you're taking a loving relationship and you're turning it into a hateful relationship. And that's why it's not allowed. This is one of very few forbidden relationships, by the way, that change after death. Most forbidden relationships, even if they were brought about through marriage, do not change after death. A person cannot marry, for example, his mother-in-law. Even if his wife, God forbid, passes away, he can still not marry her mother, and that stays forever. A person cannot marry a mother and a daughter, even if the mother passes away and she has a daughter from the previous marriage, he cannot go ahead and marry the daughter. These are things that do not change. This is
Rabbi,
yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yes.
What happened, if I'm not mistaken, didn't he marry the two maids, which were the sister or half-sisters of Rachel and I can't think of her name all of a sudden.
Leah?
Leah, yes.
So this is another question that I wasn't even going to address today, but I could if we get a chance. Actually, the Torah itself does not specify and say that Bilhah and Zilpah were sisters to Rachel and Leah, or even to each other. It just says that Lavan gave Zilpah to Rachel. No, sorry. Bilhah to Rachel, Zilpah to Leah, and that each of them in turn gave their maid servants to Yaakov to marry, and he married them and so on and so forth. So it's not explicit, but it is true that according to our sages, they were actually full sisters with each other and half sisters of Rachel and Leah, because Lavan had them with his maidservant. So therefore they were his daughters, but also had the status of being servants. And therefore he was able to bequeath them, so to speak, as servants to his main daughters from his main wife. And therefore he was actually marrying another set of sisters who were also half sisters of his first wives. That is true. So I will get to that if I get a chance. But first,
thank you.
Sure, absolutely. But first, we'll try to address the Rachel and Leah issue, and if we have a chance, we'll get back to the Bilhah and Zilpah issue. So, this is a question that the commentaries do try to address, and different commentaries offer different interpretations. So maybe we'll stop now. If anybody has an interpretation that they would like to share, we can open the floor. Or one that you can just make up on the spot if you like. Yes.
I wanted to say that he was tricked into it. And he could not cancel the marriage with Leah.
I hear what you're saying.
So he was forced into, he still wanted to, to marry who he wanted to marry. And he had to do it.
Well, I hear what you're saying, and it's actually going to be part of pretty much what we're going to say in this class. But just for argument's sake, just for the back and forth of it, I would ask you, just because he wanted to marry her and he loved her,
right,
is that still a reason to go against the Torah which he was observing?
That's assuming he was.
That is assuming he was. That's correct. If he wasn't, then we have no class.
But now I never knew that actually he married 4 sisters, not just 2.
Yes. Yes, it is interesting. So actually, let's address that question. Yes.
Yeah, I am sure you're going to say it now, maybe, but since you're going to address this, but 2 of the sisters had marriage documents, and the other 2 sisters were concubines. They did not have marriage documents.
That is correct. 2 of the sisters were born to a mother that did not have marriage documents. Did they themselves not have marriage documents? I'm not so sure about that. But they were born to a mother that did not have marriage documents. Yes, that's correct. But that in and of itself does not diminish their sisterhood, if you will. Because a sister is a sister, even if one of them is born out of wedlock, or even if both of them are born out of wedlock, because it's a blood, you know what I'm saying? It's a blood connection. But what you are saying does lead into the answer to that question anyway. I'm just parrying with you back and forth. But that is part of the answer, yes. So let's actually address that question.
I have another thought, if I can throw this in.
Yes, please, go ahead.
So the rabbis currently say that you shouldn't negotiate with a terrorist, because if you pay them an exorbitant fee for somebody that they kidnapped, they'll just be encouraged to kidnap, God forbid, another Israeli or another soldier.
Yes.
So, and the same thing, God forbid, if a rabbi was taken as a captive, whatever the going rate of captives are, you can pay them, but you can't pay an exorbitant rate. So so the thought that popped into my mind was, well, this is obviously an exorbitant rate. You're going to work for me 7 years, and then I'm going to trick you, and you got to work another 7 years. I'm thinking that if Yaakov would have been more like this, like he would have stood up more, he would have stopped future loved ones from taking advantage of future Yaakovs.
Well, I mean, I do hear what you're saying, but I do want to point out, just reading the verse itself, it's interesting that the 7-year idea wasn't Lavan's. It was actually Yaakov's. Yaakov is the one who comes up with it. I'll work for you for 7 years for the sake of your younger daughter, Rachel. Like, obviously, he felt that that was her value. Like, he didn't feel like he was overpaying, so to speak, for her. And once he was given Leah instead, I guess Lavan was kind of just building on that. Like, you yourself said that she's worth 7 years, so you can have her. You just have to work another 7 years. So, yes, it is interesting that that you had to work that long, but it was his idea. And in fact, the commentaries say that there's Kabbalistic significance in the 7 years, corresponds to the 7 divine attributes and so on. So, so back to the question, did the patriarchs actually observe the whole Torah? So the Ramban, famous Ramban, says, Ramban is, by the way, of Moshe ben Nachman, not to be confused with the Rambam, who's Moshe ben Maimonides, who lived about 100 years earlier. Both one in the 1200s, one in the 1300s. Anyway, the Ramban says that the patriarchs only observed the Torah in the Holy Land, because the Holy Land of Israel is a place where there is explicit holiness, the divine presence rests there. So it was almost like out of respect and honor for the Holy Land that they observed the Torah. So meaning to say, everybody agrees that their observance of the Torah was voluntary, not mandatory. After all, the Torah wasn't given yet. So why would they have to observe a commandment that they were not commanded in? The only things they were commanded in were the 7 Noahide laws. And then Abraham got the mitzvah of bris milah. Yitzchok started separating tithes. Even that wasn't a command. That was something he did on his own. Yaakov was commanded not to eat the sciatic nerve, and so on. But the rest was not a command. It was simply something they did out of a desire to serve Hashem in the best possible way. So the commentaries, the Ramban, based on the fact that it was not mandatory, says, well, they only observed it in the Holy Land, which was a place where they felt they wanted to serve Hashem in the best way. When they were out of the land, they did not observe it. And he proves it from this very story, that Yaakov was out of the land of Israel when he married the two sisters. And not long after he came back into the land of Israel, still with those two sisters, one of them passed away. And that was Rachel, who passed away on the way. So he doesn't explain exactly what was in between. I mean, she didn't pass away the moment they walked into the land. And what was Yaakov planning to do? I mean, was he going to divorce her? Was he, I don't know. I mean, it's not exactly clear. But in any case, it was not the problem was one that did not last that long, unfortunately. And he also mentions that Moshe Rabbeinu's father married his aunt. According to the Torah, it is forbidden to marry one's aunt, which is interesting because it's permissible to marry one's niece. In fact, the Talmud says that it's like a mitzvah almost, because you're kind of caring for your brother's daughter or your sister's daughter or whatnot by marrying her, but you're not allowed to marry your aunt. And we know that Amram went ahead and married his father's sister. Kahas was his father, the son of Levi. Yocheved was the daughter of Levi. They were only half siblings because they had a different mother, but nevertheless, they were brother and sister. And Amram, who was a great righteous man, the leader of the generation, married his aunt. So this is another example that the Ramban brings to prove that observance of the Torah outside of the land of Israel was not necessarily observed. Okay, this is answer number one. Any comments before we go on? I'll make a comment on my own class, and I'll point out that this is different than, unfortunately, an attitude that some people have. Some people have an attitude like, when we're outside of the land of Israel, we have to keep all the Torah and the mitzvahs because that will keep our identity as being Jewish. If, however, we're in the Holy Land, we're in the land of the Jewish people, we're surrounded by Jewish people, we're doing the mitzvah of living in the Holy Land, well, now observing the other rituals are not so important. I can give myself a break on other things. Hashem will give me a pass. He'll understand because I'm doing such a big mitzvah anyway by living here. In fact, the opposite is true. If you're living in the Holy Land, you want to make sure to make the land holier, and God forbid not to profane it. So if a person was religious up to point A before he moved to Israel, he or she should be more so, should be more careful, more observant of the Torah, because it's a holy land. You want to bring additional holiness to it and not, God forbid, the opposite. That's my little rant. Okay, answer number 2 is, some of the commentaries suggest that perhaps they were no longer considered halachic sisters when they married Yaakov. The law says that when a person converts, they become like a new person. There's an expression of being a born again. Usually it's used in terms of a born again Christian, but in fact, in a different way, there is truth to that in terms of becoming Jewish. A non-Jew who goes through the conversion process and becomes Jewish is technically considered to be born again. By joining the Jewish people, they separate themselves from their previous life from their previous family, previous lifestyle, and they become like a new person. Halachically, they're like a new person. They are no longer related to their previous family. Of course, biologically they're related, emotionally they're related. We're not denying that. There was a great rabbi, he passed away not long ago. Maybe he didn't even pass away, but he's very old. I'm not going to say his name. But anyway, he's a great rabbi in Rosh Hashiva. He is a convert. And he would go to a remote city in Australia every year when he was healthy to visit his old mother because he was a convert and she lived there and he wanted to show her respect. He's still her child emotionally, biologically, even if not halachically, and he wanted to show her that respect, and that's a wonderful thing. But as far as the technical halacha is concerned, a person who is a convert becomes born again. What does that mean? So, first of all, in terms of the forbidden relationships, they're no longer considered related to their previous family members. And therefore, even if their family members convert with them, they may be allowed to marry them. The only reason I'm saying maybe is because if the relatives were forbidden to marry them under Noahide law, because Noahides also, non-Jews also have certain relationships that are considered incestuous. If it's forbidden under Noahide law, then it remains forbidden because we don't want it to be said that the Jews are less strict than the Noahides. But relationships that are not forbidden under Noahide law and are forbidden under Jewish law, if those relatives convert, they can marry each other.
Rabbi,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt. If someone converts and their parent passes, do they say Kaddish for them?
That's a good question. And basically, it's considered a good thing. It's not considered an obligation, but it's considered a positive thing to do. You are allowed to say Kaddish for a parent, even if they're not your halachic parent, but your biological parent. It does bring about, elevation to their soul because you're doing it in their merit. And it's seen as a positive thing. It's not a technical obligation. So if a person cannot do it for some reason, that's okay. But it is considered a positive thing to do. A friend of mine here in Bay Harbor, his father passed away. He's a convert. His father passed away. And he decided that he would keep everything as if it was a halachic parent, meaning to say, not just the Kaddish, but all the laws of mourning. He davened as a chazan for 11 months, didn't miss. So, it was not obligatory, but he felt that out of respect for his parent, he wanted to show that mourning, to show that he felt that pain. And he wanted to say the Kaddish to bring an aliyah for the neshama, and that's allowed. There's no problem with it. So,
what is the restrictions for a convert? Someone who is converted to Judaism. It still should be some kind of restriction of they cannot marry.
So they cannot marry their relatives that a Noahide cannot marry. They cannot marry their mother. Their mother converts for them. Their daughter, if their daughter converts with them. And the same applies, by the way, to a daughter marrying the father, or, you know what I'm saying? The same thing, a sister, right? So the immediate nuclear family does apply. But the more extended family, which is not forbidden for a Noahide, take, for example, a aunt, a sister-in-law. Those kinds of relationships are only forbidden by Jewish law, not by Noahide law. So if a man were to convert and his aunt were to convert also, and for some reason they wanted to marry each other, that would be permissible. You might want to take a blood test and make sure that there's no genetic diseases involved, but other than that, it's not forbidden.
Okay. And with two sisters, it's just mostly to keep a peace in the family, not to create any hate, any odd situations between relatives. That's the whole situation.
Exactly. It's not to take a relationship that was loving and to turn it into jealousy and hatred, correct?
Mm-hmm. Not even if both of them would be, first and second wife at the same time, because at that time a man was allowed to marry a number of women.
Exactly. Well, now it's not even allowed, so it's not a question. But even at that time that it was allowed, that's correct. You couldn't take them both. I mean, you can never marry two women at the same time. There always has to be a break, like we see with Yaakov. He waited 7 days. But even so, you cannot be married to both at the same time, correct?
That's Leah was a convert first. That's why she stopped being a sister
that's what we're going to try to suggest right now.
Oh, okay.
Yes, good question, yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Rabbi, but I didn't get what was the problem with Moses?
Moses' father was married to his aunt. Amram was married to Yocheved, who was the sister of Kahas.
Okay.
Both Kahas and Yocheved were children of Levi.
Okay.
So Amram's father was married to his aunt, which is forbidden by Torah law. So the Ramban uses this as a proof to his idea that in those days they did not observe the Torah outside of the land of Israel.
So that's not the problem with Moses' marriage, it's with his father's marriage.
Correct, with his father's marriage, correct.
Okay.
So the second answer, coming back to the suggested second answer, is that Leah converted to be able to marry Yaakov.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Just before you go to that, in answer to Anna's question, a convert can't marry a Kohen.
A convert cannot marry a Kohen, that is correct. That is true. So, if both Rachel and Leah converted to be able to marry Yaakov, so then we can say that they were no longer considered halachic sisters, and that would explain how Yaakov was allowed to marry. The problem with this interpretation is that conversion in those days is not the same as conversion is nowadays. Because at that point in time, the whole observance of Torah was voluntary, not mandatory, as we said. So the idea that when you convert, you become born again, it's because you're really becoming part of a different nation with a different set of laws. So it's like a whole different culture and it's a whole new beginning. So that's one thing. But when the observance of the Torah is only voluntary, not mandatory, what it means is that the Jewish people then were really not so different than the rest of the world. Yes, they were monotheistic, they believed in one God, and they were family members, but they did not have the status of being fully Jewish because they didn't have the Torah yet as an obligation. So therefore, it's not clear that they should be considered new people, so to speak, through this conversion process. That's question number one. Question number two, again, this is all on the interpretation that the reason they were allowed to marry was because they were considered like converts and like new people. The second question is, when it comes to relatives whose marriage is forbidden because the Torah says so, we don't necessarily understand it. Why is an aunt forbidden and a niece is permissible? it's the same level of closeness in terms of blood relations, yet one is forbidden according to the Torah, one is permissible. Okay, the Torah says so, it says so. But if it doesn't apply because they're converts, okay, it doesn't apply. Over here, however, the Torah specifically tells us the logic as to why one should not marry two sisters. The logic being that they are people who naturally love each other, and now you're putting them in a position where they might come to hate each other. And that should apply even if they do both convert, and they're now halachically not related, but emotionally, obviously, they still are related. And you're still taking them from a situation of emotional closeness and perhaps bringing them to the opposite sort of thing. So this is question number 2 on that answer. Okay, so finally we are going to come back to the answer that was suggested just before. And that is that since the observance of the Torah at that time was only an extra observance, it was not mandatory, therefore it did not take precedence over any law that was mandatory. So again, we have the 7 Noahide laws. That's mandatory for all of mankind. We have the 613 laws that applies to the Jewish people. If there is any conflict between those two systems, nowadays, obviously, a Jewish person would have to defer to the system of the 613 laws, because this is the Torah that is obligatory on everybody. And this is the system that replaces the 7 Noahide laws for us. We're no longer bound by the 7 Noahide laws. We only have the 613. Now, it's true that the 613 encompass the 7, but if there is any detailed, minute area where there's a conflict, we would keep the 613 because that's the system we're part of. If, however, in the time of the patriarchs, there would ever be a conflict between the 613 laws that they were observing as an extra way of connecting with Hashem, and the 7 Noahide laws that everybody had to keep, well, then they would have to fall back on the 7 Noahide laws, because that was obligatory. I'm talking for too long. I need some input here. Any questions, or is everything I'm saying so crystal clear?
I'm just about lost on everything.
We'll have to find you then.
I heard a very interesting short Devar Torah that when Yaakov woke up in the morning, he saw it was Leah. He said, "What did you do to me? You tricked me. You misidentified yourself." So she said, I think this is in a medrash, she said, I followed you. Who stood in front of his father and said, "It's me, your son, your older son." And then he said, "Well, I was only following the advice of my, help me out here.
My mother."
I was only following the advice of my mother. So she said, "I was following the advice of my mother, or my father."
Or her father, right?
Yeah. So after they went back and forth like that, so when she said that, he said, "Oh, okay," and did raise the event up again for the rest of their lives.
Yes, I did see that. There is a medrash that does say that. It's indeed. In fact, everybody was saying in those days that the older one of the daughters of Lavan should marry the older one of the sons of Yitzchok, And that's why Leah's eyelashes fell out, because she was crying. She didn't want to marry Esav. So when she did marry Yaakov, she was like, following what you were saying, David, she was like, well, you claim to be the older one. You took the firstborn, so you're the older one. I'm the older one, so now I'm your match. So it's a similar concept. Okay, so let me go back to the answer that I was starting, but perhaps put it into more simple terms. Yaakov had promised to Rachel that he was going to marry her. He had given his word. Already by the well, when he saw her, he already wanted to marry her. And he already gave her the signs which would identify her so that her father couldn't trick her and send Leah in her place, which according to our sages, she shared with her sister rather than have her sister be embarrassed. But the point is, he had given his word he was going to marry her. And it is self-understood that a person has to keep their word. A person has to be honest and not back out of their commitments. This is something that was well known in the Noahide world. It's not one of the 7 Noahide laws, by the way. The 7 Noahide laws are: do not kill, do not worship idols, do not commit adultery or other forbidden relationships, incest, and so on. Do not steal. Do not eat the limb of a living animal. Do not blaspheme. And establish courts of justice. So there is not a specific Noahide law to speak the truth and to be honest. But it was something that the Gentiles did observe. It was expected that a person should be honest, which is exactly why we read in the verse just before, Yaakov says to Lavan in the morning, Lama rimisani, why did you trick me? Everybody knows you're not allowed to trick, you're not allowed to be dishonest. And Lavan didn't say, ha ha, that's not one of the 7 Noahide laws. I'm allowed to trick you. No, he didn't say that. He said, well, she's older and we don't give the younger before the older, blah, blah, blah. He made an excuse, but he agreed to the concept that you're not supposed to trick. Yes.
And dishonesty would fall under the mitzvah of stealing.
Okay. I hear that. I do hear that. It might not be a technical act of stealing, but certainly conceptually. You're stealing the other person's knowledge, stealing their trust. So actually the Ramban, speaking of the Ramban, we mentioned him earlier, the Ramban says that we can really expand all of the 7 Noahide laws to include many, many other laws. So most of the laws that the Torah says about interpersonal relationships are included within the 7 Noahide laws according to the Ramban. So you might be able to include, being dishonest in stealing. But the point is, yes.
I think Ramai or Lama Rimitani, that's why did you lie to me? Ramai is a liar.
Let me see how the Sefaria translates it. So what is this you have done to me? I was in your service, Rachel. Why did you deceive me? Yeah.
Deceive is softer, lying is harder.
Yeah. Lavan was both. He was a liar, he was a deceiver.
Right.
Whatever bad names you could use would probably.
One thing is for sure, he wasn't straight.
Yes.
He wasn't honest.
Definitely. So Yaakov here had a choice. we said before, he was already committed to marrying Rachel. Now he was married to Leah, obviously in a way that was beyond his control. So if he were to want to observe the Torah, the only way to observe the Torah would be to back out of his commitment to marrying Rachel. To divorce Leah, by the way, wouldn't have helped, because you're not allowed to marry your divorcee's wife. As long as a man's divorcee is alive, he's not allowed to marry her sister. Litzur legales arvosa aleha bechayeha. The verse in the Torah says, as long as she's alive. So it's not just that they can't be concurrent wives, but they can't be wives at different times either, as long as they're alive. So divorce would not have helped. And therefore, Yaakov had a choice. Should he keep his word that he had given to marry Rachel, or should he not follow the Torah's laws about marrying two sisters? So his choice was to keep his word and keep his commitment, marry Rachel. Obviously, not doing so would have created tremendous stress to Rachel to miss out on being able to marry him. Presumably, she had similar feelings to him as he had to her. And obviously, she had big plans also to become the mother of the Jewish people. It was known to the matriarchs. They were righteous women. They had prophetic vision. They knew that Yaakov was going to father the Jewish people. They knew there was going to be 12 tribes and so on. This was a very big deal. And for him to not marry her would be to cut her out of all of that. Now, again, if it's a Torah law and the Torah is obligatory, well, we can't just cut corners to make people happy. But if it's voluntary, and Yaakov was doing it just to serve Hashem in an extra way, well, that should not diminish from his obligation towards his fellow person. And in terms of keeping his word to her, he was committed to do that, and that's what he had to do. The Rebbe actually uses this to also explain a different question. But actually, let me first pause if anybody has any comments or anything to add to this. No. So everybody knows that Avraham gave himself a bris at the age of 99. But the question is, based on what we've been learning, that the forefathers kept the Torah, and Avraham was in the land of Israel, not like Yaakov in this parsha. So why didn't he give himself a bris before he was commanded? Now, there are different ways to answer that question. But based on what we are saying now, that you have to keep the Noahide laws first and foremost before the Torah's laws, I'm talking about the patriarchs had to. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe explains that for Avram to give himself a bris before he was commanded was forbidden by Noahide law, because the verse in the Torah portion of Bereshis says, "Shoifech dam ha'odam, dama yishofech." A person who spills the blood of man deserves to have his own blood spilled. Which, if you take that verse at face value, it means not only is it forbidden to kill somebody, but it's also forbidden just to wound them. Even just to spill somebody's blood is forbidden, and even to spill one's own blood is forbidden. There's no difference. It doesn't say spilling somebody else's blood. It says shofech dam ha'adam, spilling the blood of man, any man, including oneself. Just like one is not allowed to commit suicide, God forbid, because we don't own our bodies. We don't own our souls. We are entrusted with them. God entrusts them to us to take care of, but we don't have the right to terminate them. The same is true about the health of our bodies. We do not have permission to do things that cause detriment to our own health. For example, to spill our own blood. So Avram was actually not authorized to do a bris milah, and therefore he had to wait until he was commanded to do so, and then he did. I have bris on my mind today because I was, for the first time in my life, at a triplet bris this morning here in Surfside. I got an invitation on my phone, and I didn't pay it much attention. I mean, I know the father, but not so well. But then I looked at it again, and it said, our son's bris. And I mentioned it to my wife, and she said, didn't you hear they had triplets? So I could not resist but to attend. It was quite something. 3 chairs of Elijah, 3 sanduks, 3 babies, 6 names. It was great.
3 criers.
Exactly. Only 1 mile, though. I'm not sure if he got paid triple overtime or not, but yeah.
Baruch Hashem.
Baruch Hashem. So this should teach us a lesson. We always try to take a lesson from things that we learn in the Torah. The word Torah comes from the word hora'ah, which is a teaching, a lesson. So we see here how a person has to take care of basic obligations that they have towards others, rather than things that might be, they might feel extra religious, they might feel extra holy, but they're not really the correct thing to do in that situation. The Gemara talks about a chassid shoita, a foolish chassid. And the Gemara says that that's talking about, an example of that is a person who sees a woman drowning, but he's such a chassid that he doesn't touch a woman. He can't touch a woman. So he, God forbid, lets her drown. That's a chassid shoita. That's a fool. Because your first obligation is to save a life. And if it means touching a woman, and if it means holding her, whatever it might be, you have to do that. So the same can be said, spiritually speaking. You might be living in a community where there are other Jews who are spiritually drowning, who have lost their sense of connection to Judaism, to the Torah, to the Jewish people. And meanwhile, you're very busy doing your own thing. You know, you're studying, you're praying, you're davening, you're doing your mitzvahs. That's wonderful. But if Hashem put you in a place...
Was I the iPad?
Well, for the pictures.
If Hashem put you in a place and he brought to your attention by putting you there that there's somebody who needs to be saved from spiritually drowning, that becomes your obligation. And that obligation comes before an extra Torah class, an extra prayer. All those things are wonderful, and we should do them to the extent that we have time to do them. But we should make sure to save that other person, even though they don't think they need to be saved. They think they're good. But the fact is they are spiritually drowning. You should make it your business to save them, to reach out to them. Hanukkah is coming. Give them a menorah, remind them, invite them if you're having some kind of gathering and so on. And you can light them up spiritually. You know, right here in the post office in Surfside, there's a woman who whenever I'm online there, I talk to her about Judaism and whatever the upcoming holiday is and whatever. And she says, you know, I live in North Miami Beach. I'm surrounded by religious Jews, but none of them ask me about my Yom Tov and my Shabbos and anything like that. So sometimes we see people every day and we become like used to seeing them, and it doesn't occur to us that they might actually want some attention. Some of them don't want the attention, and we should give them the attention anyway. But some of them actually want it, and we just become oblivious because we're busy with our own stuff. So this is a lesson about that. Yes. One at a time. You're both muted, so whoever wants to ask, go ahead. I can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself.
Now I think I'm unmuted. It
Yes,
wasn't
go ahead.
working. You were asking a question, and I was going to answer it, and now I don't remember what the question was. Oh yeah, no, you said light them up.
Yes.
I heard today on the radio that light them up is the new word for the year. They add into the dictionary always new words. And this is the new word for the year.
Okay, I didn't even know it. What do you know? I got the new word. Yes, Isaac.
I heard a slightly different word, which is when you read in the Torah, Yaakov, and what happened with Rachel and Leah and switched and whatever. Who does that apply to? What kind of people do you have that, who does that apply to in the sense that anybody should identify with it? And the answer is, it happens to every single one of us, because we all get married to people and we think they're all Rachel, we think they're all princesses and they're whatever, and dee-be-dabba-dabba-doo. And the next morning you wake up to life and you realize it's Leah. Okay, it's a different person that you ended up marrying, or different than what your expectations were. And how do you deal with it? The question is, if you keep her to be a Sanua, or whether, because even there, the Sanua gave him most of his children. She gave him 6 Shvatim, while the Ahuva gave him 2, and the other Shifachas gave him 4. Whatever it was, the Sanua, the one that she really was, the real wife, whatever, Leah, ended up giving him more, not more, but definitely a very steady stream of things that he needed to do with his life, and yet he never expected to marry her. And he said, in the same way, those of us that are fortunate enough to grow with our wives and see that, yeah, she wasn't exactly what I was expecting, or she wasn't exactly the way, but to grow into a love and a relationship is very important also. That's all.
Yes, I hear it 100%. That deserves a class on its own, but it's a good one, yes.
I'm sorry, Rabbi, but the interference was my granddaughter decided to call me right in the middle.
Okay, no problem. Very good. So just a 1 minute roundup. The point of the class was that Yaakov had to observe the obligatory laws of the Noahides, which includes being honest and keeping one's commitments, before the extra laws of the Torah about not marrying 2 sisters. And we also have to make sure to open our eyes and take care of our obligations towards others, those that are around us, whether physically or spiritually, and care for them before we do kind of extra things for ourselves. Yes.
Not only did he have to be, I forgot what I was going to say. So not only did he have to be honest, which was the Noahide laws, also he didn't want to embarrass her, which is falling under the category of murder, which is also the Noahide laws.
Right. I don't know if she would have been embarrassed per se, because she didn't do anything wrong, but it would have been a huge disappointment for her. Would have been like, just a kind of terrible life to have to live with that dashed hopes. Very good. Thank you all for joining, and I'll see you next week, God willing.
Thank you.
Thank you
Rabbi.
very much, Rabbi.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Sure, my
Good
Thank
day,
you.
everybody.
Have a good night, Rabbi.
Thank you. You too.
Amen.
Bye-bye.